let her introduce herself again before we go to questions.
Okay, hello. It's lovely to be here. I write two main series that you may have come across. One is the Euphemia Martin's Mystery series. This is the latest one. Because all authors bring their latest book and say how wonderful it is, and it is wonderful. But no, this is about World War One, and it's about British intelligence services. Our main character is a young woman who, right at the beginning of the series, was a maid and is now a British intelligence officer. This is the other series I write, which takes place 20 odd years later and is, not surprisingly, about World War II. And in this one, Euphemia's daughter Hope immediately starts in the intelligence service in 1939, and it's about her adventures. There's a few mentions of old characters, but mostly it's about her finding her own way in a very different world. I think does that help?
It does. It does. As a warning, though, if you are into the Euphemia series, give you a spoiler about who she ends up with.
But that is actually already out. You find out who she marries in A Death in the Church. If you haven't got that far yet, yeah, don't read the Hope novels, because she gets engaged and unengaged half a dozen times. She's not very lucky in love until she finally makes a choice. But that's in A Death at the Church. So that's the one just before this. So, and I suppose you have got a few to go through before you get there, which is, you can't really see this online, but basically that's the length of the ones that you go through before you get in A Death in the Church. So yes, there is that spoiler that you find out who she marries. But without giving it away, did you have a sneaking suspicion about who she was going to marry?
I'm going to be honest, as a fan, I kind of really hoped that she would end up with someone else.
I know who as well.
I was a little disappointed with who she married.
Well, the person that you were disappointed about comes back in the next Euphemia book. A Death in the Hospital, that's out in October, if I've got it right. But we can talk about that offline.
It's so hard to go around without giving it away. You do also write a series of diaries every week, don't you? About one of the main.
Yeah, I do. There's a character called Fitzroy who was meant to be a walk-in part and sort of like the second book, and wasn't meant to be that very important, and just wouldn't go away, and actually has become a core thread of the entire books. Regardless of what he would say, he is not a main character. He is a spy master, and he is often working either in association or actually with or even commanding either Euphemia and later on Hope. Every Friday I produce a diary, which is an entry from his diaries, which you can find on my webpage. It's, and it's free to look at. There's no charge, and it's a little part of the diary, and it sometimes confuses people because I don't do it chronologically, because some of the things that you'll read in the diary are his thoughts about things that you may well have read or are about to read, and some of them are actually foreshadowing things that are to come. So you kind of have to work that part of the puzzle out for yourself. But he has a very distinct character, and the diaries are written in a very distinct way. His voice is really clear, and yeah, he's one of those characters that when you're writing comes along and there is no way you're ever going to get rid of him. He's there till the end. In fact, one of my readers said to me, "Oh, Fitzroy, he's going to be there at the last trump, peeking out from behind God's chair."
Really good. He is a really good character.
I'm glad you like him. He's meant to be a flawed character. I don't write perfect characters. I want to write characters that reflect people, and he is quite like a lot of the people that you can read about that were around at World War One, the people who were involved in espionage when the service was very, very young. It's just that most of those characters disappeared out of the service, most of them after a particular incident in Northern Ireland, where a lot of them went native and gave away too much information, and it was that part of the service was all kind of reformed. But Fitzroy in my stories never goes to Ireland, so he ends up being one of the longest serving intelligent officers in Britain, not because he's old, but because he didn't go rogue. He's always slightly roguish, but he hasn't gone full rogue.
So I've got a couple of questions now based on that one. You said that he kind of arrived and like made himself known and wanted to stay. So how much do you plot out your books, and how much do the characters just kind of take off and tell you how they're going?
That's an interesting one. I think that right at the beginning of Euphemia, I knew Euphemia was going to be involved in World War One when I wrote the first story. I knew that was where I was going to go to, because I was really interested in the lead up to it and how it changed everybody's lives and all the things that were going on. And it was going to be about mysteries. I didn't know at that point she was going to become an intelligence officer. It was only after Fitzroy came along and was irremovable that I realized that there was an inevitability that he would see her potential and use her as an asset and later on try to actually recruit her. Normally, I plan the mysteries and what's going to happen really quite carefully. But as I said, when I started the series, I wasn't entirely sure about how she was going to solve these mysteries, and that sort of all came together. The characters have lives where they sometimes they do kind of emerge. So the stories and the mysteries might be set by me, but what some of the characters do around those mysteries is kind of set by them, I suppose. I was very surprised at who Mary married and what happened there. That was a bit of a. I thought she was going to be a wild girl for quite a while and not fall in love with. Oh, can't give that away either. But she did.
Do you have an end in sight for the series? Because obviously, if you kept writing Euphemia, you'll eventually meet the Hope series.
Yeah. I haven't discussed that with the publisher yet. We are hoping to continue the series for a while. I kind of suspect that the series will have to end around the time she's pregnant, because you can't do too much. But on the other hand, I'm really torn with the idea that just because a woman is pregnant, she's suddenly useless. Of course she isn't. She can't go running around fields and things, but she's still got her intellect, and she's still got a lot of the skills that she had. But so I don't kind of want to end it on her being pregnant as if to say, oh, she's pregnant, got a family now, that's the time for her to retire back to her husband. That is so not the message I want to send. But I think somewhere around the time that she's got a very young Hope who is a bit of a demanding toddler, that we might move on from that, because Fitzroy often writes in his diaries about things that happened when Hope was young, and I think that's probably going to be the only source of the stories of what happened when she was young. I don't think I'll be writing her childhood.
Do you keep, because the world of Euphemia and Hope to the same extent is like really rich and full of like a lot of characters who are involved in like multiple stories. Do you have to keep really meticulous notes so that you don't get mixed up as you go?
Well, actually, I do. I now have a thing where every time I write a new book, I take a notebook and I write down all the characters and the salient parts in the plots and things that I've left hanging and bits that are going to continue. And at the front of the notebook, I write, this is where you can find, the story behind whatever. But I only started doing that fairly recently, because the thing about writing a series is, to begin with, you never know from one book to another how far it's going to go. It now looks as if it's going to go on for a while, which is lovely. And therefore, my agent, my editor, who looks at the manuscript and actually sort of says, this part of the story makes sense or doesn't make sense or whatever, it kind of asks for a Christmas present. And what I think he'd like for Christmas is what they call a Bible, where you put all the characters in, all the background stories, everything, and it's all indexed. So that may be what I'm creating over Christmas, because I don't currently have one. Most of it's in my head.
Well, I'm amazed you don't ever get mixed up.
I once or twice, but he's caught it, which is why he's saying we need to pin this down.
Yeah. So we've got a question on the stream, but before we go to that, what I wanted to talk to you about is, when we recorded our promo, you were telling me why you'd sort of set books in World War One and World War Two. Do you want to
Okay,
What
yeah.
about that now? Because it was really interesting.
I've actually put a little bit of introduction into some of the newer books to try and explain that, now that I know the series is there, actually inside the war. My family, well, all families were affected by the war, of course they were, but in a lot of ways it seemed to have quite, well, I know lots of stories about my family. Let's start with one of them. My great, my grandfather, on my mother's side was much older than my grandmother, and he was in World War One, and he was gassed. And the job that he was doing at the time was being a spotter, which is somebody who's going out, perhaps with a group of people, as forward liaison, looking at what's going on. And he was gassed, and he was bombed in an old ruin as well, or shelled. And he was the only man left alive. And that had the stories about that, the effect it had on him has kind of rippled down the family. And the next Euphemia actually looks at what a spotter does and what that was all about. So I was really interested in that. But then there are other things like my father, who was a child during the Second World War. The bombs were all falling down around them, and he hadn't bothered going to the air raid shelter because he was quite young. He was a bit of a tyke. He liked running around and doing naughty things, and he was very young. He was under 10, and he ran out the back door because he realized he might be in danger, and this incendiary bomb landed in front of him. So by all rights he should be dead, except it didn't go off. And later on they discovered, when they opened it up, it had a note inside that said, "From your French friends." So there are people I never know, I will never know, I will never meet, who ensured that I could be born by a real great act of bravery, because obviously if they had been caught doing that, they would have been executed. So there's that amazing interconnection of people who did such amazing and courageous things, and not necessarily because they were innately brave people. It was just because that's what happened. They had to face up to what was going on, and not all of them managed, but a lot of them did. My other grandfather desperately wanted to sign up in the Second World War, go to war, but shortly before that he'd become a fireman. And unfortunately for him, he's a rather good fireman. So they gave him command of part of London docks. So when they wanted to sign up, they said, "You've just got to put all the fires out." And from him, we had stories like there were bombs falling, incendiary bombs falling, and what the firemen ended up doing was climbing on the buildings and kicking them off one by one to get them into the street, away from these huge buildings, away from the docks, because we needed the docks. But on one particular night, he and his part of his brigade were climbing higher and higher, kicking things off here, there, and everywhere. They were successful. The building they were on didn't catch fire. However, when morning came, they finally saw how far up they'd climbed, and none of them were able to get down on their own. They all insisted that they came, because obviously the emergency was over, but they all insisted that they brought the ladders to help them down because it was just too far up. And they always said, if we'd known that was how high we were going, I'm not sure we would have gone, but it was dark, so up we went, doing our job. And then they were all sat at the top like a load of cats. I really liked the image of these incredibly brave people sitting there going, "Oh, what did we do?" Except, London docks, much more fruity language, which I won't use.
You had a bit of a link to an intelligence service as well.
Oh, yes. My mother's brother, who is no longer with us, was apparently recruited for the intelligence service. He had a reputation for being fearsomely intelligent. But all I have, and all I know, is a picture of him in the desert, outside a tent. I don't know anything else. When he came back, he did other things, and he never talked about it. So it's fascinating. And when you actually talk to people and they start thinking about it, a lot of people remember an uncle or an aunt or a great aunt or something, and they'll say, "I think they might have been involved in it as well." But these people who did all incredible things, generally they don't talk about it. So it's fascinating.
It must be really hard to research as well, like what they would have been like.
There is a huge amount of material out there, which is fantastic. And a lot of the key figures who arranged the SOE or who put together the auxiliary units or anything like that. There are loads of books about them, and when you read about them, you can read about the connections, the people who worked with them, and some people, I think some people who disappeared, like in World War II, the Battle of Britain was really won by a man called Dowding, who was the equivalent of Bomber Harris, but with the Spitfires. Unfortunately, he put in a research paper at the end of the war about some odd things that his men had noticed about their machines and how they had been almost not exactly sabotaged, but they had been fiddled with. And he interviewed the Luftwaffe as well. And when they talked to the pilots, all the pilots said was that they saw things on the wings. They saw little creatures. And the reports from the British services and the reports from the German services were apparently very, very similar. So you put this all together in a document, not saying I believe this or I believe that, but saying this is a really odd phenomena. Because at first he had thought it was to do with the pilots getting stressed, not having enough rest, so basically trauma. But then ground crew started coming to him and saying that they'd found these big scratches alongside of planes and they couldn't explain it. So anyway, put all the papers together, presented it to the War Office, to Churchill, and he was then more or less whitewashed out of history because what he'd suggested was to everyone else so preposterous, which is, you know, so even the people that are hidden you can find, I suppose was what I was saying. And there are tales about, people refer to how Ian Fleming was a well-known character, and he kind of appears in one of my books, but you have to be careful, you have to be clever to spot him. And there's lots about, I mean, the SOE also, they published a little book about all the things that you had to learn and all the things you had to do. And it was given to somebody. This is the Special Operations Executive. This was the group of people who volunteered, a lot of them were civilians, and they went through a very short training period before they were inserted into resistance movements in Europe. So they had to, their knowledge had to be brought up really quickly in how to look after themselves, how to communicate, how to kill people, you know, everything that's necessary for a good resistance fighter to do. And those are still here, and there are people who obviously were there, but there's not very many of them left. And I think there are more stories told on the espionage side than there are, for example, people telling stories from the trenches, although that, of course, is also there. So it's surprising how much you can find. In the last newsletter I sent out a selfie of my of one of my bookshelves, and it's all this material about World War I and World War II, and right in the middle is this massive great book that says The Defense of the Realm, MI5, which was their recent official biography. And I look at that and I bought that, and you know, I've only read a few pages here and there. Most of the other ones are all about the people and operations, because there were a lot of files released, so we know about double agents, and we know about things like putting dead tramps in kind of submarine sort of tubes and sending them off to Germany with forced papers in their pockets. All these incredible kind of things that they came up with and did to try and deceive the Germans. That was all about making the Germans think that we were going to attack on one position and actually we were going somewhere else, and they fell for it because they found this dead soldier, but it wasn't a dead sailor rather, but it wasn't a dead sailor. So there's lots and lots of stuff out there, and I think there's also a real interest in the espionage, the cunning side, the clever side, the operations side of both world wars, but particularly World War II, because I mean, after Dunkirk we were completely on our own. And really, we had to do a lot of very cunning things to survive. It wasn't until the Americans came into the war that we were able to turn the tide. So there were people sitting in little groups everywhere, trying to think desperately about what totally outrageous thing that seems impossible, almost like Mission Impossible, can we do to further Britain's interests in the war.
I'm going to stop monopolising you with my questions now and ask you some from the stream. So Samantha, who is probably the boss of the author chats now. She's way organised. Says, do your diary entries ever cause issues for you at a later date?
No, not yet. And there's actually, I think, 58 of them now. It's been running for over a year. So I do one a week. So not yet. But I do have to sit on Fitzroy in my head occasionally. He says, say this, say that, tell them about this. And I haven't decided that. Oh, yes, you have. But anyway, I'm currently still in charge of his diaries, no matter what he's saying in my head.
I love that. I've just got an image of you like having a conversation with him while you're typing.
I think that's what a lot of authors do. I mean, you know, people have described authors as people who have far too many imaginary friends. I mean, that's, and I think it's also something about when you want to make a character a good character, you need to know them as if they are a person. You need to know them in a sort of in the round. You need to know them in the whole. And you know, I have to say, Euphemia doesn't pop up that often in my head. She will say things occasionally, but sometimes when Fitzroy's been really annoying, she will actually kind of intercede and say, nope, almost like down boy, because after all, she's probably the only person he ever really listens to.
Sam also says you write quite widely. Do you have a favourite genre that you write in?
I like writing in genres, is the honest answer, but I think they are of a different type. For example, Euphemia and Hope are definitely of the I have an issue with the term cozy crime, because I think I've said before in interviews, cozy crime always makes me think that you make somebody a mug of cocoa, you wrap them up in a duvet, you apologize for killing them, and then you kill them because it's cozy. It's not that. Obviously, in the Euphemia and the Hope books, there is always hope, and that makes it I don't know, positive. I want people positive about things. But the answer to the question is I generally fall in love with the characters. And if I'm in love with the characters and I'm in love with the time, I don't think the genre matters that much to me. A terrible thing to say. I love puzzles, which is why I write crime. And maybe I am a natural crime writer. I tried to write a book once that was kind of about a romance sort of thing, and it was called Playing for Love. It was about the Edinburgh Festival. And I still had to kill somebody in it. I really couldn't do it without a murder. So I'm really interested in that sort of crux that people come to when all the things like whether or not you've got a blue car or a saloon car or whatever actually cease to matter because you're faced with the reality of life and death, which most of us kind of cover up with all kinds of things, whatever it is that takes our fancy. We just live as if we're going to live forever for a lot of the time. And that's fine, because you don't want to think that every day might be your last. That would be a terrible way to live. But there is something about confronting death that can make people more honest or more badly behaved, which is equally as interesting. So yeah, I can't get rid of a murder. So I write murders all the time, regardless of what I'm writing, what genre I'm in. There's always death. So I guess that makes me a crime writer, doesn't it?
Does sound like it. So yes. Sam's going to really keep you on your toes with this question. She says, how difficult is it to write a character who relies on body language instead of verbal cues, for example?
I did that. That was a guy called Daniel Truce, who I wrote for a German publisher, and there were 3 in the series. And I read cold reading. I read CIA handbook. I read some British handbooks. I mean, all these things are available if you actually go digging for them, all about how somebody would read body language. So essentially, it was about doing a vast amount of research. I mean, many years ago, I did a little bit of, I did a short course in neurolinguistic programming. So I had some idea, and I just built it up around that. And I was just interested. So it was difficult in the sense that I had to bump my knowledge up considerably. But it was also fascinating. So, and useful. because having said that, I tend to find I do this huge amount of research for a story and then I forget a lot of it afterwards. I know it when I'm writing and then I forget it, but there were one or two bits and pieces. I'll give you a piece of body language advice. Most people know about faces and they know about hands and gestures and everything like that, and people can control it. It's the feet that count, the feet that actually reveal somebody's true intentions. If you're standing with somebody talking and their feet aren't pointed towards you, they're pointed towards the door or wherever, that means they want to leave. If their feet are pointed directly at you, that means they really want to stay and talk to you. That's a general rule of thumb. I'm sure there'll be exceptions. But the point is, people don't think about their feet, so they actually give away a lot more than most people think. So there you
go. Ah, that's a good tip. We're all going to be looking at everybody's feet now. I mean, you're talking about doing a lot of research and you're like become an expert on things. What's the most surprising or interesting thing you've learned from your research?
Well, I don't know if I become an expert. I definitely end up knowing more than most people, but that's not quite the same because I'm looking at really odd things. I think one thing that really struck me when I was reading about the wars and stuff is realizing at the end of the war, you're left with so many people who are still able to kill. Now, they've killed for their country, and we've always known that soldiers today may have, they have post-traumatic stress, things like that. But especially in World War II, we had all these civilians that we trained how to kill. And must have been atrocious for any policeman afterwards investigating a crime, because you could look at somebody and think, could she have killed? Yes, well, if she was in a service, she could have done. And it no longer, he wasn't a murderer. And I came across, I often talk about Fairbairn and Sykes because they produced some fighting books that were aimed, well, Fairbairn was a tiny little man, he didn't weigh anything. And he had learnt to fight sort of gutter fighting in China when he was in the British police force out there. And he produced a book which for its day I think was really advanced. And it was, I think it's called something like Get Your Hands Off Me. And basically it's self-defense for women. And when you go through, it's got things like for what you do with wandering hands, or what do you do if somebody clasps you in a bear hug and you don't want to. And it's a really good and helpful book, and most people don't know that. They're very basic skills. And I suppose the shocking thing there is that kind of knowledge is out there and available. And I think it's unfortunate that women need to learn self-defense. But I also think that it would be great if they had enough self-defense that they weren't considered by anybody to be easy prey. And yet there's this wonderful little book that doesn't require you to be strong or do anything complicated, but is still an enormous help. So that was something that surprised me, that kind of stuff had been done and then again kind of disappeared.
So let's go back to Hope and Euphemia for a bit, because they're both quite strong.
In different ways.
Yeah, quite strong characters in different ways. There is a bit of a real kind of historical thing of women in the intelligence service as well, isn't there, especially during the wars?
Right. There were an awful lot of women who went into the SOE operations in the Second World War. And this was because it was suddenly realized that a man who was walking down the street in an area of conflict, not in uniform, was automatically suspicious. A woman carrying a basket down the street was just a woman going shopping. And they were far less likely in France, for example, to search her basket and discover that she was carrying a radio transmitter. So it was something about the invisibility of women that actually led them to recruit women. But then when they recruited women, they discovered that, some of the most famous spies who achieved great things were women. And I wish I could remember this woman's name. She had a forced leg. And she still became one of the best undercover spies. I think she was American, but working for the British Secret Service, undercover spies in France during the war. And the Germans had a special name for her. And what she particularly excelled at was changing her appearance completely, almost. And so they could never find her. Her disguises were just amazing. In the First World War, I think Euphemia is unusual. I created her to be a very odd character, to have a particularly strange background that made her suitable, and for her to run into one of the more maverick. I mean, she runs into a maverick agent who is one of these people who he doesn't seek permission; he asks forgiveness, and only then, if he's got it right, if he's got it wrong, he kind of tries to pretend it didn't actually happen. So, World War One female spies were not unheard of, but were less common. But though people helping the intelligence services, women who were used as assets, there was a lot of those. There's a very short diary entry, which I don't think is historically 100% accurate, having talked to somebody who's a specialist in this area about Fitzroy seeing, for example, Mata Hari. So there's that kind of sort of femme fatale kind of looking for. I mean, that's been used by the intelligence services around the world for, First World War and before, obviously. But women actually acting as independent agents because of their intelligence and because of their skill set became common in the Second World War, but before that was very rare, as far as I know. There may be lots of things that are locked away as secrets that, I don't have any special access to anything, so I can only go on the information that's been released.
Sam says, was it Virginia Hall?
It sounds like that. I can't honestly remember, but I know she had a false leg. She had a really good life until she suddenly lost her leg. And this is what she ended up doing. That's all I can remember without looking it up. It could be. I'm sorry.
So, without going into spoilers, can we talk a little bit about Euphemia's background?
Yeah. Euphemia starts, right from the very start that she's living with her mother and father. Her father's a vicar, and she has a little brother called Joe. Her parents do not have the happiest of marriages. You come to understand why they don't have the happiest of marriages as the stories go on. Her father is quite a scholarly vicar, and because he recognizes that Euphemia is intelligent, he teaches her Greek and Latin, I think it is. I'm trying to remember. And she really takes to ancient languages to the extent that she's never really interested in modern ones, something which horrifies Fitzroy, by the way. But he teaches her to think analytically, to solve problems, and she has a very unusual upbringing because he sees her for who she is. Her mother, on the other hand, is known to say things like, intelligence on a girl is as much use as a pair of hooves, which Euphemia pointed out would be great. You wouldn't have to buy any shoes. No, that didn't go down well either. And her mother is the granddaughter of an earl. And what happened was that when she was young and wild, I don't think it's giving anything away here to say she ran away with the curate and was cut off. She has always dreamed of going back to her upper class family, and as such, while her father's been training her to be smart, her mother has been training her in table etiquette and how to arrange dinner parties, and how to run a great house, which becomes very useful when she ends up a servant, because she knows how things are meant to be done and can help the butler plan a dinner party or whatever. But I designed her so that when her father dies, which she does at the beginning of the first book in the series, and she goes to look for work, and she ends up as a maid of a rather disreputable nouveau riche family. She sits between upstairs and downstairs, so she has neither perspective, and she's trying to learn. And what she learns, to her what would be her mother's horror, is that she prefers the people below stairs, but she still belongs to the other side as well. So yeah, she has a complicated background. She has strong incentives to earn her own living, but the first thing she does when she arrives at the house of the person that's employing her is help one of the daughters of the house remove a dead body from a corridor. And her mother has said she mustn't reveal who she truly is because she'll bring disgrace on her grandfather. So when the police turn up and say who's been dragging this dead body around, she suddenly kind of strikes her because she's a bit shocked about the whole thing, that really she shouldn't have done that. So it's time for her to get herself in gear and find out who the murderer is before anybody finds out that she's not who she says she is. So that's her first incentive, and she rather enjoys it.
It's a good description. I don't want to ask you any more questions. I've got more questions about it, but I don't want to ask any more questions because it might give away spoilers.
I should add one other thing to that, is that, you know, my great grandmother did come from a rich family. She was cut off, and she did go off and try to live in service to survive. So it is based. She was the inspiration for it. She ended up marrying a tobacconist and had 13 children.
Wow. Did she ever reconcile with her family? No.
They wouldn't. One of her brothers used to come and see her for a while when she lived in a little railway cottage, but no, the family would never have her back. And it wasn't because she married the tobacconist. I should say it was. My voice going funny. Is it okay for you?
Yeah. No, okay. We're cutting out a little bit.
Okay. It was because her father had remarried and she hated her stepmother, and she told her father, and he said, either you get on with your stepmother or you're out. So she left. I think that must have taken a strong character, because at that time, all you could do if you were a well brought up young lady, she was a very well brought up young lady, was go into service because you knew how a house should be run, if you were lucky, or become a prostitute. There were no other openings for those kind of women because they weren't educated in a particular way, and just generally the time. So anyway, she inspired it.
Well, there's some great questions now on the stream. Do you ever miss seeing patients, or do you still do that from time to time?
Oh, you mean as a psychotherapist? No. I loved my time as a psychotherapist, but I worked helping people work out their own stories for a long time, and now I'm writing my own stories. So no, I don't see people anymore. I teach creative writing part-time. I write books, and I sometimes write plays. Occasionally I do articles, and that's about it. No psychotherapy, apart from every now and then I meet someone and think, oh my goodness, you should go into therapy, but I don't even say that.
It's very nice that you didn't say that about me.
I wouldn't anyway.
How did the opportunity to become writer in residence for Siege Perilous Theatre present itself?
Well, that was as much as anything about, I think, just making contacts and meeting people. And I worked with the director of Siege Perilous on a play that I just sent to him called Suspicious Minds, which was about the death of an Elvis fan. Again, murder mystery. What a surprise. It wasn't particularly billed as a murder mystery, but that's what that was about. We got on really well, and he talked about how he really wanted to encourage new writers. And I'd done I've been mentored myself a number of times, and I knew a lot of the craft and the theory, and I said, well, if I can help. And that happened.
That's really good. Did you mentor any really good
famous people?
Huh?
Or famous people, or people who've become famous. I didn't do it for that long at Siege Perilous, but since I've been teaching playwrights at the university, I have been seeing the names of some of the people that I have taught go on to win prizes and to do some really cool things. And I always try to keep vaguely in touch with anyone I've taught. They always know how to contact me, and sometimes they come back and tell me how well they're doing, and that's brilliant. I feel enormously privileged to be part of their journey.
Because you've written plays, because I'd imagine that's quite a difficult sort of change from doing just fiction. If you had the opportunity to have a TV series of Euphemia, would you write the screenplay?
Probably not, because screen is different again. I would love to, that's the honest answer. I'd love to do it, but I think what I would like to do if it went to a TV series is maybe storyline it, so suggest what could be in the episodes. But I think probably it would need an experienced screenwriter. I hate saying that. I'd love to do it myself. I'd love to do some screenwriting, but I haven't. And it's a very different medium. I mean, the thing about a play, when you're writing a play, is that your audience can look anywhere. And it's very immediate, and there's a lot of feedback between the audience and the actors. It's a very organic thing. But something on a screen is entirely different. You're directing your attention to, it's a lot of it is talking heads. A lot of the time, it's entirely different way of telling a story, and it's like, you know, when you're writing a play and you think, oh, I would really like if it will be panned across the countryside now with some nice music, you know, like Midsummer Murders or something like that. You can't do that. You can't. It's a much more raw and visceral thing. Theatre. I love theatre. Yeah, I don't know how to write TV plays. I really like to, but I don't.
Have you ever mentally cast it? So.
I think Euphemia would be Lily Jones. Fitzroy, my mind changes all the time. I did come up with somebody for him. No, it's gone. What I'd really like to know is how other people see it, because that is a really interesting thing, because while it remains a book, I give a little bit of detail about how people look. Like, we know that Bertram loves pies, so Bertram is never going to be thin and gangly like Rory is. And we know that Fitzroy physically is almost like a whippet. He's so wound up and so, you know, he moves so much. And that Euphemia is a proper woman. She's a curvy woman, and so is Hope. But that's just my version. I want to know what other people see when they read them. And if I ever got to do a TV series, I think Sunday evenings would be best, in case anyone's listening. Sunday evening shows like we used
from
to.
the BBC, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Period drama, yeah. But exactly that. I would really, what I would love to do is to go around and ask people how they saw Euphemia, and then try to create this sort of Euphemia image that encompassed most of people's ideas. Because there is nothing as bad as watching a movie and thinking that's not my hero or heroine or whatever. They just look wrong. It just throws the story out entirely. So.
Sam asked, she says she's learned that among your many careers, you've been a voice actor. What did you undertake?
Only a couple of things. The first one was an open audition for a animated piece, which I don't think is actually available anymore. And it was a second female lead, and it was just the main character was kind of sort of sarcastic kind of person, and they're easy to do. And acting as if somebody's sarcastic is the easiest way to do anything. And I did a few other side characters and monsters in that, I think. And then for one of my plays, we needed some stuff taped, we decided. And in rehearsal, I said, oh, well, I'll read this bit for now. And he was a little old woman or something along those lines. So can't do it at the moment. I did that. So a few bits and pieces. But the first thing I do, the director was very good, and he got us all onto IMDb as actors, so that we could prove that, you know, we really had done this once. And it was part of being a psychotherapist, because I also used hypnosis. And, you know, when you do things like that, you learn to be able to control your voice to a large extent. And also, I have children, so we're all talking funny voices all the time. The only thing you must never ask me to do is a strong accent. My accents make people curl up and hide under tables. I cannot do accents. I sound like how I sound.
I think it's a thing for some people, isn't it? I can't do accents either.
And then you have some people who are just brilliant at it. I think it's just how if you have the ear for it. And I don't.
I'm always impressed when people can, though.
Oh yeah, it was great.
There's a question that says, are there any subjects that you wouldn't write about?
Yes.
You're quite keen on having lots of murders.
Murders. I have a problem with you open a book and it's a beautiful young woman who is being displayed, murdered, maybe partially clothed or whatever. I will not touch that. I don't like that kind of stuff at all. The other thing I would find it extremely hard to write would be the death of children or the death of a child. And that's probably still because I'm in that mothering zone when one of my kids is 12. So I can just, I can get too into empathizing about it. So I don't think I could do that. I want my murders to be about who those people are and why they've been murdered. So I want them to be realistic. I don't want to make things too gory. I don't want to make things too sensational. It's about the mystery. It's about the personalities. So it's more about the kind of murder I would write. But yeah, I'd find it almost impossible to write a child murder, I think. Especially a boy, because I have boys. I mean, it's sort of like, it's harder, but it's, not that I wish any harm on girls, and little girls are lovely, but I've never had one, so I'm not quite as connected to that.
I suppose at the time as well that Euphemia is written, like child survival rates were not as high.
No, not at all. No, that was natural. If you were poor and living in certain areas, you wouldn't expect all of your children to survive. And I once was talking to somebody about this, and they said, "Oh yes, but the families will get used to that. It will be a normal thing." And I thought, you really don't understand what it's like to have a child, because it would never be normal, even if it was the norm that children died. I'm sure that every parent that ever lost a child that they loved would have felt the same, and that would have been, a huge bereavement and loss. So I suppose I'm saying that I don't want to write anything that takes me down to darker personal path. Nor do I want to write anything that horrifies some of them to the extent that they can never let it go. I'm sure I've read things that have stayed with me that I really didn't want to know about. But yes, children in those days, and that's why we have Euphemia's little brother, because he's quite privileged. But we also, in various books in the Euphemia series, have boot boys and other children who are servants who are working really hard. So they're not our idea of what childhood is like now. So I hope I have acknowledged that. It's only the privileged few that really get a childhood, a proper childhood. And you can also even argue that, childhood was invented by Victorians because they liked these pretty little mini people all dressed up, unless, of course, it wasn't one of theirs, in which case it was just someone to go up a chimney.
Well, we're on the subject of children. Sam said, how have you found the balancing act of working with children at home this year?
Oh, I'm fine. I chose to write at home because I wanted to be around the family. And I think because my partner's also at home, we achieved what we wanted. We wanted to be parents who were very present in our children's lives, but at the same time, we wanted to give them space so they could get away from us if they wanted. And they know that I work, and when I'm working, they were quite often meant to be doing homework, which I used to check on afterwards, and sometimes they had and sometimes they hadn't, because they're children. But no, the only thing that disappoints me about my children, and this is a terrible thing to admit, neither of them like reading much. They're not interested in books. The younger one will read lots of scientific books and facts and things like that, but they only want their stories in visual form. They love stories in visual form, and they have a huge knowledge about how story works, because we'll sit and watch a movie, especially me and the younger one, and we'll gabble away. We spoil it for everyone else because we predict what's going on. But they're both very good about either having family time when we're doing things together, or working on their own, and they're both super confident on the internet, and they both have friends that they contact like that. So especially because I've been shielding as well, we've got into quite a nice rhythm with them being at home. In fact, my younger son would like me to homeschool him. I really don't think I have time to do that, and I think it's a good idea that he's in school with other kids. But apart from the imminent threat of everybody dying of the pandemic, I'm exaggerating, obviously. We've all quite enjoyed the lockdown, I'm afraid.
Have your children ever read your books?
No, I did offer. I said to my 12-year-old the other night, I said, well, look, would you read a book if it was my book? And he went, I don't know what to say. He'll suggest titles. He'll talk to me about plot and character if I want. They both will. But no, I won't read them. Maybe it is because it's something Mum does. I don't know.
So you're saying they liked things that are quite visual. And I really like asking authors this question. Would you make a graphic novel of your books?
Oh, I really like graphic novels. And I actually read. I don't read as many as I'd like to, and I'm very aware of one that's sitting on my bedside table, which is called Night Witches, which I'm looking forward to, which is about the female pilots. Yes, although it's a tremendous amount of work to break something down into panels and do everything like that. If I had the time, and that actually translates in author's language to if somebody was paying me well enough so that I could afford to spend the time. I would have no problem. I think that would be a great thing to do. Love graphic novels. And I also think my elder son, even though he doesn't read books really now, he didn't want to learn to read. He just wasn't interested. But I used to read him comics. And then one day I said, right, I haven't got time to read to you anymore. And he learned to read really fast. Within the next 2 months, he caught up with his peers. So I like graphic novels as a form because they can create show aspects of a story that other forms can't. But I also like the way that they can be a bridge into storytelling because I think they can be more welcoming than just, streets of just, if you don't particularly like reading, that's horrible, isn't it? Just looking at something with that much text. When I was a kid, I always used to look for books with pictures.
Sam says, what are you working on at the moment?
I am just finishing the next Hope book, which is set in World War II. And then I am going back to Euphemia again. And I'm got another Euphemia to write. I am also writing, I think, a truly horrific story, but under an entirely different name, so none of the Euphemia fans will find it. Though it is about World War One, so maybe they might work it out if they're very clever. And I'm also working on a young adult novel, which is actually a contemporary young adult novel. So that's going on there. And I have notebooks full of ideas and stories. I'm not going to run out of ideas. I'm really worried that I might run out of time to write all the things I want to create. But Euphemia and Hope are very much there and carrying on. How many I'm going to do a year depends entirely on the publisher and how things go. So if you want more Euphemias, please buy them.
Wendy Jones says, hi Wendy, you've written a book about Burke and Hare. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, Burke and Hare. Well, there was a play that I wrote first of all. Somebody approached me and said, could you write a play about Burke and Hare? And Burke and Hare, as you probably know, are Scotland's most successful serial killers. They never dug up a body. People always think they dug up bodies, but they didn't. They were Irish navvies who came over here and they, through circumstances, found themselves wandering down the path towards murder. I thought that it was very much a case of, if I was going to write a play, I read all the information I could find, and I thought I didn't want to write a play about 17 murders, because I thought, or whatever it was, sitting there watching one body after another body after another body fall would be a bit dull. You'd have to start thinking up, how could you make the murder exciting? Could you put music to it? Could you put a dance routine in, or whatever? It wasn't going to work. So I thought, what hasn't been done, and what hadn't been done that I was aware of, was that nobody had really profiled them properly. And I have one of my degrees is in psychology, and I thought, let's profile them and make them real people. So I did this as a play, and it was successful, and I was very happy with it. And one of the comments that I often got was people saying they really felt like real people now. Not that it wasn't a plea for forgiveness. What they did was unconscionable, but it was very much where there but for the grace of God go I kind of thing. So this play ran, and then the play finished, because we really thought that after 5 tours at different times, we should really, do something else, move on with our lives. But I was still stuck with some of the things I hadn't been able to include in the play. So I wrote a short novel for Fahrenheit Press, which is called Burkes Last, which is based on the play, but allows you to see inside the mindset of one of the characters more than was possible in the actual play.
Wendy also asked where the inspiration for Euphemia came from, but we touched on that earlier.
Yeah, great-grandmother. Well, the interesting thing, I suppose, to add to that is that I woke up after dreaming about her and then I wrote it. And any books that I have ever written that have got through to publication, I've always dreamt the story before it's actually become a physical thing. So it's my sleeping mind that comes up with the best stories.
You said that you were writing something truly horrific under a different name. What other names do you publish under? In case we want to go and find the truly horrific.
Well, I can tell you that I publish under C.J. Dunford, but it's not that name. And then I have another name with another publisher, which I'm sworn to secrecy on, so I can't tell you.
Ooh.
I will tell you I've written science fiction under that name as well. But it is this is the clue. If you find the publisher, it's the author that they talk about as being the one who is a secret author, and that's part of the whole thing about this particular author, is that nobody knows who they are, but it's me. So good luck finding who that is.
You set us up. You realise now that there's so many people going to. You're going to be really shocked when we all come back and go, "Are you this?"
Well, that would be brilliant. It'd be quite funny. But I mean, there are themes that I always use. I'm always killing people, so you can be sure that there will be murders in it. I've also written actually one name, which this isn't, is J. Mason. I wrote as, because I wrote another a series of novellas, which is about a paranormal investigator who is a college student. So that's and they're only available as ebooks, and they're quite fun, but they're short things, and I'm not sure if I killed anybody in that. That's probably why I only went to a series of 3. No.
Is Hope going to be quite a long series?
I hope so. Sorry, can't say it any other way. I have a great trouble now with the verb hope. Every time I write it, it's sort of like, can I find another word instead? But again, with publishers, it always depends on sales, because they always, they have to go with where the market's going. That's the nature of the business. But we are currently talking about extending the series past the initial 3, which I was contracted for. So I have the next Hope novel actually covers quite a big chunk of time, but that doesn't necessarily happen all the time. So yeah, I hope Hope could carry on for a while, because in the next Hope story we're into the time of the Phony War, which is all the stuff that happened before Dunkirk, and where people are just sitting around waiting for things to happen. So we go through that period and a little bit beyond. But I mean, the next story might be the whole of it might happen in a fortnight. It depends what the story is.
So we've got like about 1.5 minutes left.
Okay.
Would you like to just give us a quick recap of your books?
Oh, that's very kind of you. The books I would really like everybody to run out and buy are Euphemia Martin's book. This is the one that's currently out. It's called A Death at the Races. And it is all about Euphemia's first real mission as a secret intelligence operative just before the First World War. So even if you haven't read anything else, it's quite a good place to jump in. The follow-up to this is A Death in the Hospital, and that comes out on October 1st. You can pre-order it at the moment if you want. And that is about Euphemia working in a military hospital, surprisingly enough. One of the great things that happened when my publisher was actually sold to Headline, so I'm now published by Headline, was that they said, you can write the stories as long as you want. So instead of the short sort of 50,000 word stories I was writing, these are all now proper 100,000 or over books. So that I feel that I've had a chance to go into much more depth, and that kind of starts with A Death in the Church, I think. And so these books have, I think they're a lot more chewy. We've got a lot more mental chewingness. And okay, running out of time. Of course, this is the other series, Hope for the Innocent. This is the only one that's out. There's another one coming out. It's called Hope. We're not quite sure what yet. We've got 3 or 4 ideas. But I will tell everybody when it does. If you email me at Caroline Dunford Author at gmail.com, and that's all one word, and say you'd like to be on my newsletter, I will send you 1 newsletter a month for free, full of interesting things, and tell you what any other books that are coming up. And what else could I say? Thank you for having me. Please read the Fitzroy Diaries. You can find them on my landing page, and if you just, to be honest, my webpage, if you just Google Caroline Dunford, it's still an unusual enough name that there aren't very many Dunfords left for whatever reason. Probably, I don't know. Maybe they were all killed in the war. But anyway, that's not very funny. But if you Google Caroline Dunford, you will probably find me. And I have a landing page, a web page at Squarespace. So Caroline Dunford and Squarespace will find you all the information you need to know, how to get to any of the books. And the other thing is, I love questions, I love comments. Please feel free always to email me. It's always it's a delight to hear from a reader, even if it's a reader telling me I've spelt something wrong.
Thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.